I'm impressed with your tech skills.
Girl, I am like the most non-tech savvy person in the whole world.
I don't think that's true because that would have definitely gotten messed up for me.
Well, we are live, and so I wanted to say hey to everybody. Thank you guys for coming on with us. I'm so excited because I have a pretty special guest today. This is Leisha Drews. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I first heard of her through Jamie McLaughlin's podcast, Unfiltered Motherhood, and just was so fascinated by the information and education that she brought behind learning our cycles as women. And so, yeah, if you get a chance, definitely go and listen to that. It is incredible information. And so I want you, Leisha, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let's see kind of your background and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, like Casey said, my name is Leisha. I am a mom of almost 3. I mean, I'm a mom of 3 already, but we're about to have a baby. Kind of like anytime I'm in that stage of like, it could be tomorrow or it could be a month. So I have no idea. My other kids have been late. I'm not term yet, but I hear third babies are crazy and they do what they want. So who knows what's going to happen? I'm just trying to kind of like go with the flow and be ready. So that's like my big life stage right now. It's just kind of like this big weird transition, but good, like so good.
Yeah.
So I live in Oklahoma with my husband and my kiddos. And I actually went right out of high school, went to school for nursing. And a funny part of that story is when I was growing up, my grandma was always like, honey, if you ever want to do something good, you should be a nurse. Like she would tell me that all the time. And I was like, ew, grandma, no, I'm not going to do that. So I thought I wanted to be a preschool teacher. And I started going to like a program at a tech school, like finishing high school. That was for early childhood. I can't remember the certification now, but about a quarter, so not even a whole quarter. It was like a few weeks into the program. They were like, oh, actually, we're canceling this program. And then they knocked the building down and they were like, and I was like, oh, maybe this is a sign from God that I'm not supposed to be doing this. I don't know. It seems very dramatic. And they were like, oh, well, you can do, you have another year after high school, you can do this other program. So I was like, I'll just try the pre-nursing, whatever. And I started going to pre-nursing and I was like, okay, this is where I want to go. So ended up going to nursing school right out of high school, graduated right before I got married. And I worked in the hospital for almost 10 years. I worked in the hospital for like 9.5 years before I quit. And there was so much that I loved about it. But what I really started to see was just like, I felt like there was more that we could be doing for our patients. And I just kept seeing people coming back sicker and sicker. And it just kind of was like discouraging to me that some of the preventative care that I wanted to be able to do for my patients, or like even just really connecting with them, I wasn't able to. I was too busy and just running around too much. So for me, I had gone through some of my own health journey at that point. I grew up as a teenager, I had terrible acne, just awful. And it was basically my parents were both like, sorry, honey, like we had it too. And I went and took a bunch of different medications. I went on birth control. I went on antibiotics for years, all these different things. And kind of in that same time frame, I started to get migraines where it's like once or twice a week, I'd be like down at 4 o'clock in the afternoon as a teenager, sleeping all night, throwing up, like those kind of things. And every time I went to a doctor, it was just kind of like, well, it's just kind of normal. It's probably your hormones. You can take basically birth control or antibiotics were kind of the only options that I got. And didn't really get any answers other than like, well, there's nothing big wrong with you, so go on with your life and throw up sometimes. And so I was just like, okay, I guess that's what I do. And I remember my mom actually asking a dermatologist one time, like, should she not be eating like French fries or chocolate, or like, is there any food that she shouldn't be eating that could be making this worse? Because it was bothering me so much with my acne. And they were like, oh no, food doesn't have anything to do with it. I remember that like exact conversation. And I was like, see, mom, I can eat French fries. It's fine. So my poor mom, she was really trying to figure it out. She didn't want me on those medications, but again, like she didn't know what else to do. So fast forward 5 years or so, I was newly married, working at the hospital, and I thought I was pretty healthy. Like I ate what I thought was really healthy lunches, like salads and like lean pockets, because those were healthier than hot pockets. And I like really thought that I was doing pretty good. But I was still feeling pretty bad for my age, basically. And so I started to just like, I got some tips from a couple of friends. I started doing some research. And when I started truly learning about nutrition and learning about how I took care of myself and how that impacted my body, I started to make some changes and they started to work. And so I started to notice that there were food triggers for my migraines. And then when I didn't get enough sleep nights and nights in a row, I would get a headache, and things like that. And so, long story short, at that point, before I had my daughter, I had really started to make some changes in my nutrition and just started like continuing down that path of education. And then once my daughter was actually born, a couple years after she was born, she was even having some issues. She was 2 years old. She had asthma and she had like eczema and all of these things. And I'm like, what is going on? This is like the most like I've done everything I know to be healthy for her. And I was told by a pediatrician, like, oh, it's fine. She'll probably have asthma, but we just take medication for it and it's fine. And like in my heart, I was like, this is not fine. This is my baby and she should not be sick. She's 2.
Yeah.
And so I think that was really the catalyst for me. It's one thing when it's you and you're learning and you're like, well, I feel a little better. It's fine. But like when it's your baby
Yeah.
and it's not okay, that just like brings out the fire for the moms.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, at that point, I actually found a functional practitioner who was able to help me with gut work for her. And I was like, this changed everything. She never has had asthma since. She's 7 years old. Like everything has been so much better for her. And so that's kind of what led me into thinking like, I'm going to get a degree in nutrition or something holistic health, and ended up making this really long, ended up getting my certification with functional diagnostic nutrition. And so between my background as an RN and my FDN certification, now I am able to do some of that functional lab work, which I think is so helpful. But then over the last couple of years of doing that, I really focused on women's hormones and hormone health, because I think it's like all the things that I'm so passionate about. Because when you are able to help a mom change her health, not only is that incredibly important in and of itself, but it changes generations, because when moms know better, they do better, and their kids are going to be healthier, whether they've had the kids yet or not. Their husbands are going to be healthier. Like it just makes such an impact. So I love educating and empowering women so that although almost all women that I talk to have already had those experiences that I've had of going to the doctor and being told like, it's fine, you just feel bad, it's normal, take some medicine.
Yeah.
That's not what they get when they come to me, and that's not what I want them to expect to get. And so I just feel like all of us deserve to have someone who will actually listen and really dig into more of the root cause, and then also just really help us get in line with the basics, like good nutrition, good sleep, good self-care, because each of those things, when they're off, you're going to feel bad. Like if there's just nothing, or you're just no way around it at this point. So I do the fancy stuff and the lab work, but like I also really like to go back to the basics and kind of like cut through some of the confusion around all of that, because we've all Googled a little too much. And it just gets really hard. So just kind of like going back to making it more simple and more direct is where I like to go. So that was a lot.
No, I love it. I love hearing that. And that's something for me too that I've become super passionate about, is just like the root cause. It's so easy you've got all these symptoms everywhere and you're trying to treat these symptoms, but we're not looking at what is the root, because oftentimes I feel like the root fixes all the things, if we can get to the root cause. So I love that. I love what you do. For you in your business, what does your typical client kind of look like? So what are the main issues that women come to you with within your practice?
I would say the biggest things at this point are usually, I do totally work with women who are not moms, but I do have a lot of moms who come to me after 1 to 3 babies, generally. A lot of them are two, and they just feel terrible and they have no energy. Maybe their hair is falling out. They have no libido. They're really struggling with periods. Usually there's either like it's irregular or heavy periods. Um, Sometimes even infertility type things, like, but usually the big picture is like terrible energy, terrible periods, and either it's been like that for a long time or it's really been like that since a baby, whether it was the last one or the one before that or whatever. And I just see that pattern so much, but I see that in our culture, we're told it's normal. Like, well, you're a mom. Of course you're tired. Like,
Yeah.
go on with your life.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that that needs to be true.
Sure.
Of course, we're going to be tired sometimes. Like, we do hard work, but like, you shouldn't be just tired all the time and feel like crap all the time. It's not necessary.
Yeah. So do you find, so when they come to you, what is kind of your initial process, I guess, that you, I mean, and I know that everyone's different and everyone has their unique thing, but you said that you do some testing and kind of what does just your typical kind of setup look like?
So I do, yeah. So everything is very personalized. And so I always will get on the phone with someone for like 30 minutes to an hour before they ever decide like if they want to work with me or not, because I want it to be the right fit for them and for me, because I don't want to work with someone who I can't help. That's just not, it's not fair to anyone. So we definitely always will go through like a big history of like what's been going on, what are you wanting to see change, those type of things. That's always a big start. But when we actually do start working together, I personalize exactly, which labs probably are going to be the most helpful up front and just based on like what they can do at the time as well. And so some of the labs that I like to do most often are like a gut test because we can look at bacteria, we can look at parasites, we can look at yeast, we can look at how the gut is functioning, if there's inflammation there, like it gives us so much information. Sometimes I also like to look at a mineral test because especially as moms, we lose a lot of minerals when we have babies. And it's like 10% of our minerals per baby just for pregnancy. And that doesn't include breastfeeding. And so many of our foods are not mineral rich or nutrient dense at this point. And I mean, even until the last year or so, like I hadn't focused on that. But there's so many foods that we can eat that are going to be mineral rich that we've been told are bad for us, like things like fruit and carbs generally are things that women might be cutting out because again, like another thing that I see a lot is trouble losing weight. So of course, like, well, we have to cut sugar, we have to cut carbs. But then the truth is that comes eventually starts to cause more stress on our bodies because we're working harder to break down the food that we do have. And especially if you already have a gut issue or you already have stress, like it just becomes kind of a cascade. So I do like to look at minerals. And then I also will do usually a pretty full hormone panel. And the kind that I do looks at not only like the sex hormones, but your adrenal glands as well, and how your body is using those hormones so that we can get some patterns of, is something that's going on for you? Is it actually your hormones or is it actually your adrenal glands? Or in my opinion, from what I've really seen over the last few years, a lot of times those hormones are going to be off and there's going to be something there that we can kind of focus on, but it goes back to the gut and the liver as a baseline because a lot of times our blood sugars are imbalanced and that can be stressful on the liver. We've been on birth control, we've been on other medications, there's a lot of toxins in our environment. All of those things can be really hard on the liver. And once the liver slows down and it's not detoxifying well, then things recirculate. And then that's when we start to have hormone problems. And then when you kind of have like the liver and the gut both struggling, your detoxification is just really not going to be working well. And that can contribute to all of the symptoms. So I love looking at hormone testing to see what's going on with hormones, but I think that it's kind of a misconception that that's the first problem. It's generally that there's other problems that are contributing to that. So I was just going to say, so we do some lab work, and obviously I have a lot to say about the lab work, but then we really start to just dive into lifestyle and like, let's make sure your nutrition is working for you. Let's personalize that. Let's look at your sleep. How can your sleep be better, even though you're a mom? Like it can still be better. And then we just kind of dive into like the rest of lifestyle from there. And it's just really based on like what each person needs. But we spend a lot of time, usually like 3 to 6 months, really going through and like meeting every couple weeks and just like diving through each part that needs to change and giving support and accountability and troubleshooting. So you're never like on your own. And you can actually take the time to make these changes, because I don't think that going in for one appointment, getting some lab work done, going on your way generally is what we need as busy women, because sometimes we just need someone to take care of us.
Yeah. No, I love it. That's so awesome. And something that I'm finding as I get older and the more kids that I have three, and um, just things are changing all the time, but it's so important, I feel like, to kind of go through the testing process, because I feel like, and I've said before in my group, I feel like we're at large, we're over supplemented and we don't even know what we're deficient in. And so I say too all the time, you can't out supplement bad nutrition. And like, if there's other things going on, you've got to be able to, one, know what you're deficient in, but two, okay, we've got to start with the gut. We've got to figure out liver function, all of those things, because oftentimes I feel like that's kind of where it starts,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we've mentioned birth control a little bit. And I know I was on birth control. Gosh, it's been a while since I've been on it, but probably like 10 years ago. And then after our first baby, I never got back on it, but I think it's important. I've heard you talk about birth control before, and I think it's important for us to kind of even know what birth control does to our body, what its function is. Again, because I feel like as women, a lot of times it's kind of given as a Band-Aid instead of like, the root cause of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, anyone who's listening who's like, oh, I would like to know like maybe the different forms of birth control, how they're different. It hasn't been super long ago, but I did some different posts on Instagram, like about each of the types of birth control. So if you like actually want to go look at that, that might be a good reference point, basically, if you're kind of like, I don't know if like maybe one type is better or things like that. But in general, so hormonal birth control is going to include basically like the pill, there are certain IUDs that do have hormones, and then anything like the Depo shot or the Nuva ring, those are all going to be hormonal birth control. Some of them have estrogen and progesterone, most do, and then some just have progestin, which is the type of progesterone in either one. And progestin is a synthetic form of progesterone. So you're getting a little bit of the effects of progesterone, which basically tells your brain that you could be pregnant, so don't have a period yet. But you don't get necessarily a lot of the beneficial effects of progesterone, like blood pressure control, anxiety control, support with sleep, things like that. So in any of the pills or the IUDs, besides the copper IUD is the only one without hormones, basically what it's telling your body is it just kind of keeps all of your hormones at a very low level. So it just suppresses basically your monthly cycle, which would normally be at the beginning of your cycle when your period starts, that everything is low. And then it goes, your estrogen rises pretty dramatically just before ovulation, or just until ovulation, and triggers the other hormones that cause ovulation to happen. And then once estrogen has done its job, it drops off, and usually like right about a day before ovulation, it drops off, and right about a day after, progesterone rises. And if you've ovulated, then you'll have progesterone. If you don't ovulate, you will not have progesterone. So once you ovulate and you have progesterone, that's going to be dominant for the rest of the cycle, ideally, as long as everything's working right, that we've already talked about. And you do have a little spike in estrogen right at the end, but then estrogen and progesterone both go down together just before your next period starts, and that's what actually causes you to bleed. So that's a normal cycle without birth control. But in a cycle with birth control, it's just going to keep everything from happening. Basically, it's just going to keep everything at a really low level. And that when you're not ovulating, it's causing you not to ovulate is its first form of action, then you shouldn't be able to get pregnant. Now, there's two other ways that birth control also works, as kind of like backup methods generally. So that first one is the one that's supposed to work. If for some reason you actually do ovulate on birth control, which sometimes happens, then the second action is it actually kind of makes your uterine lining a little bit less likely to be able to implant. So if you did ovulate and there was an egg that dropped and it got fertilized, it's less likely to be able to implant. So that probably would like just go ahead and disintegrate and you wouldn't get pregnant at that point. And then it also kind of changes your cervical fluid and your mucus so that's a little bit harder for sperm to actually like stick around and get you pregnant basically. So there's three different ways that it just kind of works directly against your fertility. And usually when you're taking it correctly, all three of those methods, between one of them, it works pretty well. But what that also does, a couple of things that are in birth control that most of us don't know about is that there's also quite a bit of iron and some copper in birth control. And those things can kind of build up in the body. And especially in women who are on birth control because they had heavy periods or painful periods, sometimes it can kind of like aggravate the problem over time. And then they try to get off birth control and they continue to have these symptoms because they have iron and copper issues like toxicity, but sometimes it doesn't show up on a blood test. It's more like stored in the tissues. And so when that happens, you might actually be anemic because you're bleeding so much. And then you think you need iron and it just kind of like becomes this big cascade. That's not the only issue with birth control. Also just over time, like having those synthetic hormones in your body, it does slow down your liver a little bit. It does mess with your gut bacteria. So even with a little bit of birth control, like a short time of birth control, some of those issues can come up. But what I generally find is that those issues were probably there even beforehand, especially if you're on birth control for a problem. And then it's just kind of like a cascade and it just kind of aggravates.
Goodness. I mean, wow, that is incredible information. I just think it's important to know like why you do what you do. I mean, for a lot of years, I just kind of did whatever the doctor told me to. I didn't do any research, didn't, the whole informed consent thing was like not even in my mind, was not my own advocate. And I feel like as I get older and I'm learning more and more, it's just like, I want to know, why we do what we do. I want to know the research. I want to know kind of, across the board what my options are so that I can kind of one, be informed, but two, be able to make the best decision for, me and my family. And so I think it's important to know, even just as birth control, as I know so many people are on, or women are on, but, just to know the purpose, to know what it's actually doing in your body, and then be able to, from there, take that information and, use it to, make the best decision for you and your family.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I know what I said sounds kind of negative against birth control. I do think that it's problematic that so many women are just put on it without any really idea of what the side effects are. And of course, the side effects that I mentioned are like not on the paperwork because that's not really something that's been widely published. But even the side effects that are obvious, things like blood clots or trouble with fertility later, like those type of things, I don't think that we're really told most of the time that can be an issue. And what I was going to say is like, there are times that birth control might be the right option for you, and that's okay. And it is a lot of times the easiest option. I think that's why so many people are on it, because if you don't know your body and you don't know when you can get pregnant and when you can't, it's terrifying to not be on birth control if you're not wanting a baby right then. So I just want to say I'm not totally against birth control. I just think that we should know what we're getting into when we go on it.
Yeah. And we're smart enough to know and to learn about our cycle and our body and all of in the way that it works too. So, okay, with that, are there, what are some general foods and or supplements that someone could take to help kind of regulate those hormones? And again, I know everyone's different, but in general, what would be some things that could be helpful
Yeah.
in just regulating?
So I think that there's going to be, yeah, everything is going to be different, kind of like based on what symptoms you have and things like that. But there are a couple foods that I think are really helpful for the liver and for the gut, which actually translates into your hormones. So I'll say two separate things. One thing that I see is a big problem for women is under eating or not eating consistently because we're busy, because all the things are on our shoulders, especially just like skipping meals or like eating once or twice a day. I see that that can make a direct impact on how your body perceives stress and how your body perceives safety. And even if you are overweight and you feel like, well, I can't eat more because my metabolism, isn't good, or I can't eat more because I'll definitely gain weight. Sometimes the truth is your body is holding on to that weight for safety because it doesn't feel safe. And so I always will recommend to women who are having hormone issues that they eat within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up in the morning, and they focus on every 3 to 4 hours during the day getting some carbs and some protein together. And so when I say carbs, I don't mean donuts. I mean fruits, root vegetables, maybe some gluten-free grains, as kind of like a secondary source. And those foods are not generally going to cause weight gain or blood sugar issues. And that's kind of like what carbs get a bad rap for. But when they're actually paired with protein, you not only get that fast energy that you need, but then you're able to break down those proteins and nourish your liver and nourish your gut and build muscle and all the things that you want to do. So the carb and the protein together, I think, is so key, especially for energy. So that's my like one thing across the board for women who are having hormone issues is you have to get nourished and you have to be consistent with it. And it just needs to be a daily thing because it really makes a difference. And even if you're a mom, like you deserve to eat. You totally deserve to eat. Like you're feeding your family. If you're a busy like working woman, you also deserve to eat. You're doing important things. So that's my one thing. And then a couple of the specific foods that I really like for gut and liver support, which leads to hormone health, is I really like bone broth.
Mm-hmm.
That one's huge. And it's mostly known as like a gut support food, but it actually is super full of minerals as well. And it's hydrating and it's nourishing and it's warm. And so those are all things that are really good for reducing stress on your body. And then I also really like raw carrots. So raw carrots, doing like a raw carrot a day, like a full-sized raw carrot, can be really helpful to kind of bind some of those hormones and toxins that are in your gut and get them out. So you can do like just a regular raw carrot, or you can kind of shred it up and make like a little carrot salad. But if you're struggling with hormones and you're like, I don't know what else to do, like if you just do those things for a month or two, I would be surprised if you don't see some difference in what's going on. That's easy.
Awesome.
Those are easy.
Yeah, I love bone broth. And I have, if you haven't seen it already, guys, I have a bone broth recipe on my page. It's super easy.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, how about thyroid? I know so many women are diagnosed with hypothyroidism or hyper, and myself included, on medication for that. Um, what I'm trying to think of even a good way to word it. Just what are some ways? I mean, obviously, if you get, you're getting tested for it, if it's showing low, what are some ways that you could kind of boost that without medication?
So there are a couple of nutrients that are specific to thyroid health. So selenium is one of them that you can take a supplement, or you can do like Brazil nuts are kind of the food that's highest in selenium. So that's just like an easy thyroid support. But I think it's always going to come back to like, okay, but why? Like, why is your body slowing down your thyroid function, basically? And sometimes it's the signaling between your brain and your thyroid, and that it's like the hypothalamus and pituitary glands in your brain speak to your thyroid and tell them to make the hormone. And there's several different ways that you can have changes in your thyroid hormones. It can be that TSH, which is what is mostly only the thing that's tested, that's actually high, and that means hyperthyroid. And what that means is your brain is telling your thyroid, work really hard and make this hormone that will stimulate or yeah, so the TSH stimulates your thyroid to make hormones. And so when that number is high, it's because your thyroid is probably not putting out enough hormones. And it's kind of slowed down. And so that's why the high number means hypothyroid. But sometimes when we're looking at the rest of your thyroid numbers, you have your T3 and your T4, which are your thyroid hormones. And then you have the active forms, which is the free T3 and the free T4. Sometimes that goes back to the gut and the liver, because if your thyroid is actually making that T3 and T4, it has to go to the gut and the gut and the liver to be able to be converted into the active form. And so there's an issue somewhere in that system when you have hypothyroid. But I do think, not to oversimplify, but there is going to be a connection with your adrenal glands as well. And if you're stressed out all the time, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not eating enough, your brain is going to have a hard time signaling well to your thyroid, or your thyroid is going to have a hard time keeping up because it's not nourished. So I really think going back to that is like looking at your lifestyle. Like, do I have hypothyroid because I'm running on empty all the time? That's not me like throwing blame at all, but like it's truly a question to ask.
Yeah.
Then if that's even like a possibility that could be causing it, then it comes back to those basics that I talked about, like really nourishing well and consistently and getting good sleep. And I really believe that like once those start to go in the right direction, thyroid numbers do start to get better. Whether you're on medication and you need to stay on that for a while, or if you're like not quite on medication, then that's kind of where I like to go with it.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, for my own self, but on the medication side of things, if you're taking thyroid medication, would it be something that you could stop cold turkey, or do you recommend having to do something different?
Yeah. So with medications, it's definitely not something that I ever will recommend, like, oh, you should stop taking this medication, because that's not within my scope. And I think that's always between you and the doctor who started you on it, because they really know why they did it. Thyroid medication, my understanding as a nurse is I do think it's something that you wean off of. I don't think you should cold turkey it, because it's telling your body to produce a certain amount of thyroid hormone. And if it just stops one day, I mean, there can be some pretty serious repercussions when you have too much or too little thyroid hormone. And that's more in extreme cases generally, but I would definitely not just stop at cold turkey without talking to your doctor and figuring out a plan.
Cool. Cool. Well, to switch gears a little bit, I want to, again, I know we could talk about so much with hormones, but I've got lots of mamas on here. I want to talk a little bit about postpartum depression and anxiety, just because I feel like it's something that is not talked about enough. And as I struggled with that and with all three of my children, I wanted to kind of ask you, what is going on hormonally after baby gets here, as to why you kind of see that drop and you see the hormones being off, and so what's happening?
So when you're pregnant, your estrogen and your progesterone are just like rising and rising and rising and rising, basically the entire pregnancy. So as you're pregnant, you're not having those monthly like spikes and then dips and spikes and then dips that you can kind of become accustomed to when you're cycling and kind of get used to. I will say that as I've been like much more informed about cycle syncing this pregnancy, I would actually love to do a study with women on like what they feel like during their pregnancies. But I feel like for me, it has really lined up the 4 phases of the cycle to almost like the 4 sets of 10 weeks in pregnancy, where like you have that kind of like more introverted energy and maybe you're feeling like lower social energy and physical energy in that first 10 weeks. And then like the second 2 parts of your pregnancy, like that 20 weeks in the middle, usually you have higher social energy and higher physical energy and like kind of that glow and you're feeling really good. And then kind of like when you get back to that it's not a 4th trimester yet. The 4th trimester is generally like after you have the baby, but the 4th part of your pregnancy, like that 4th 10 weeks, I have definitely noticed for me, it really mimics more of like my luteal phase, where maybe I don't actually feel as social and maybe like I need to be like wrapping things up and getting things done. And especially towards the end of pregnancy for me, it's like much more of like an introverted, introspective time where I just want to like be with my people and be cozy and be all set. And I think that that's so interesting. Like it makes perfect sense in pregnancy. But with that being said, in pregnancy, your hormones are not doing those things necessarily, but I do think it's still, is part of our cyclical nature. But your hormones really are very high at the end of pregnancy, both your estrogen and your progesterone, and that affects your brain in specific ways. But when you have the baby, you lose your placenta, which was producing a lot of progesterone for you. And generally, especially if you're breastfeeding, you don't start cycling right away. So you actually just kind of have that low level of your estrogen and progesterone until you start cycling again. So that low level of hormones, I think, can definitely contribute to postpartum depression. But since every woman doesn't get postpartum depression, I don't think that can be our only basically like trigger point. I do think that it's very realistic and common to feel like a big shift in mood. Like once you have that baby and like there's just so much that's involved because like you have a new baby and they're probably not letting you sleep through the night and like your body has changed dramatically and like you've lost blood and you've lost 15 pounds all of a sudden and like whatever. Like there's just so much there that's just happening within your body. And then you have your whatever your birth story is. You have that. And sometimes that's something that feels traumatic or is disappointing, or maybe it's like been this high and then like you have this baby now, which is what you've been waiting for, but also like it's almost like this, like what's next? And then in our culture, we don't have months and months where we're like treated like a queen and everyone brings us food. Like we probably have, I mean, most people who have like a pretty good support system will have a couple weeks, right? Of like somebody will bring us dinner and like our moms will come over, or our husbands are home, or those type of things. But then like I don't generally see that that's when postpartum depression sinks in. I see that like usually it's like after those first couple weeks or after that first month when like all of a sudden it's just you and this baby and you still don't feel yourself because you have been completely drained by this pregnancy. And I don't mean that in a negative way
Yeah.
necessarily, but like I just want to acknowledge it's a lot to grow a baby. And I really think that there's just a big combination of how you prepared your body for pregnancy, how you cared for yourself within pregnancy, whatever your baseline was before, and then also like your support. I think that those things all really play in to postpartum depression and anxiety. And then like anything that's going on with the baby, sometimes the baby's like having health problems or having a hard time latching or having a hard time sleeping. Like that's a huge stress for a mom. And then just this transition of like, even if you've had a baby before, it's like trying to get to know this new person and they're different than the other ones and like all the things. So with that being said, like, I feel like there's so much that contributes, but what I do think that we can do proactively, and this is something I've actually been trying to share about quite a bit on my Instagram too. So if you're kind of like in this phase of like, I might have another baby or I'm just had one or whatever, definitely come follow along. And I'm trying to share as much as I can of just what I'm doing specifically to prepare my body. And I want to say too, like, this is not foolproof. Like if I develop or like experience postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, it doesn't mean that I did something wrong necessarily. But I do think that, or like any woman who experiences it, I wanted to say, like, I'm not coming from a place of like, well, I'm an expert, so everything's going to go perfect for me.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest, but definitely that nourishment that I've spoken of so many times, like focusing on that in pregnancy is huge, because there's so many of us who first trimester just really feel crappy and have a lot of morning sickness. And so you pretty much just eat like crackers and like cheese maybe, or something. Like you don't get a lot of nourishment then. And sometimes we can really give into a lot of the like hype about pregnancy cravings and different things like that. And if you're truly not nourishing well, you probably will have a lot more cravings, honestly, and just be eating, a lot of foods that are maybe like not as nutrient dense or things like that. And some women are sick all their pregnancy. But outside of those things, being able to just really be consistent to keep your blood sugar balanced and eat those like healthy carbs and protein together, and then focusing on minerals, I think is really big as well. So making sure that you're getting like really mineral rich fruits in your diet. I think that that's a great source of carbs. I think that can be so helpful. also making sure that you're getting enough protein and that you're getting enough sleep. Like, I really do think that those baseline that I keep going back to, they apply to pregnancy in a huge way. And I think the more stressful our pregnancies are, whether it's because of the pregnancy or because of our lives outside of the pregnancy, um, our bodies just are not going to be in the same place of feeling at peace for birth and feeling as prepared as possible for this postpartum period. And so then when our hormones crash and like all of our people go back to work or whatever, we're kind of left with like, I don't have anything left within myself and I don't have anyone around me. And so I think that's my best focus, I guess, for really being able to like prepare is, you know, I think that even going back to like before pregnancy, we don't have a culture in the United States of like prepping your body for pregnancy, but so many of us are so depleted before we even start that we're kind of set up for unhealthy pregnancies or like lots of symptoms, and then for kind of that postpartum period as well. So I think if you're like in the stage of thinking about a baby, then going back to being able to support your liver and your gut well and get things balanced and make sure your minerals and your nutrients are in place before you even get pregnant sets you up for success really well.
For sure.
But with that being said, if you're like, well, I'm already about to have a baby or I already do have a baby, then what can you do now? Again, like, I think that going back to the idea that self-care is not selfish is really important, and not just expecting that like once a month going to Target by yourself is going to be enough self-care, but actually looking at like, I use these little, actually from Jamie McLaughlin. She has a CEO mom planner. I think that's what it's called. But in that there's like day sheets that you can write out your day. And I do that on the days that I have a lot going on, which is quite a few days, to be honest. But on that little planner, it has 3 little lines for self-care every day. And so I've gotten really consistent that when I'm writing out my day, whether it's that day already or the night before, that I fill out those lines for self-care. And that doesn't look like fancy stuff most of the time. Like, most of the time it's not fancy. But like right now for me, that self-care looks like before my husband leaves at 6:30 in the morning, I like to take a walk and I just go around the neighborhood for like 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much time I have and what I feel like. And the sun's coming up and I can get some fresh air and there's no kids with me and I haven't started my day yet. And I can just like think and breathe and move my body and pray. And like, that's what I need. And like, that's self-care for me. Or just another big self-care is like, a lot of times in the evenings, I'll make sure to get outside with my kids without my phone in the sunshine and just be there with them. So like for me, obviously outdoors is important, but sometimes that also looks like taking a nap instead of cleaning the kitchen during nap. Sometimes that looks like when my husband gets home, just being like, I'm taking a bath. The kids keep getting out of bed. See you later. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, exactly. So just thinking about what that looks like for you. But I think that idea, especially postpartum, of just like, yes, this baby needs you and it seems like they need only you, but like there are alternatives and they will be okay for a few minutes if you need to like take a breath, and just figuring out like what that self-care looks like. And so for like, in my opinion of what I'll need postpartum, and we'll find out what I need. I do think that like being able to go on a walk by myself sometime might be what I need, or even just take the baby in the stroller on a walk and not take the other 2 kids who are going to be everywhere with their bike. Or maybe it's just me and my big girl going on a walk, you know, something like that. Or maybe it's really going to be like just snuggling that baby and letting the house be kind of gross for a while, or asking for somebody to come clean it. But just truly like asking yourself like what you need, I think can go so far towards you filling your own cup, and not expecting that you have to run on empty, and also not expecting that someone else is going to do it for you, but just being an advocate for yourself in the most like I think we just can like get this perception that it's like, it's selfish, it's being a diva, it's whatever. It's not. If you're a mess, no one else is going to be okay in your house. So you're taking care of other people by taking care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such good advice for sure.
And I will say too, there are some different like herbs and tinctures and supplements that can be helpful. And I think that's going to be based on the person. I'll just give a couple examples of what I'm planning to use and what I have been using. But there's a company called Milk Moon that I've never tried before, but they have a really nourishing postpartum tonic. And I'm really excited to try that. Honestly, haven't even tried it, but looking at the ingredients and kind of looking at some of the reviews, I'm really excited to try it because it's very, very mineral rich, and it's also really nourishing to the adrenal glands. And like, it is a stressful time when you have a little baby. And so I'm excited to have that. I've been really consistent with either doing organ meats or organ capsules, like liver, liver capsules. And I do a lot of like bone broth, but also a lot of collagen, because I just feel like that's a really easy way to get some protein in. It's really nourishing to my gut. There was one other thing I was going to say. Even like some of those, some of the different teas that can be really like calming and nourishing. Even that can be self-care, just like setting aside a time at night that you're like, I'm going to have chamomile tea, or I'm going to have lavender, or I'm going to have lemon balm or tulsi, like those different ones that can be so soothing and nourishing. I think it can be kind of like those simple things. But the other last thing that I'm going to say is, I think that just setting your expectations to be kind of open is a good thing, but also preparing where you can. So I know like I'm not going to have the energy or really want to spend tons of time in the kitchen. Like, and I don't expect to that first week or two. Like my husband will take care of it. My mom will, somebody will. But after that, even like, honestly, I expect to spend more on groceries for a couple months because I'm just going to buy easy, healthy things. And you know what? It does cost money, but also like that time with your baby, you're never going to get that back.
Yeah.
So like if I can sit and nurse for another hour a day, or I actually can go outside by myself instead of like being like, oh, dinner takes an hour to make. So, there's that hour, then it's worth it. So I think just like giving yourself permission for things to be easy. I bought a huge stack of paper plates, and I fully intend to use all of them, like with no shame. Like there's no reason to wash dishes right now.
Yeah, no, that's, for sure. I'm extremely passionate about the postpartum mama, just because, I've been there and it's hard. And I think everything of what you said is just dead on, spot on, and such great advice for anybody. But yeah, so I want to honor your time. I would love to sometime, because I know there's so much to talk about, but I would love to. I have a pretty big audience that are, premenopausal, menopause, or in it. I would love to do, later on down the line, maybe something with you on that, just to kind of educate through that. Because I know, myself, I know it's coming, and I don't know anything about, I'm not educated on any of it. But I wanted to talk about kind of your website, your social media, the resources and things. I know you've got some free resources on your website. You've got lots of really great information there. And then, like she said, her Instagram, y'all, is super, it's awesome. She's got all kinds of information that she's posting on there all the time. So maybe talk a little bit about that, about your website, maybe even, we mentioned a little bit in the beginning about your services, and I know you're fixing to go on maternity leave, and you had told me you're not really taking any new clients until November. But I plan to work with you after you get back. I would love to do all the things. I'm just so interested in it. So tell us a little bit about your stuff.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, like it's really hard for me right now to be like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. But also like, that is part of my postpartum plan. It's like, I cannot be more overwhelmed than just like 3 kids is going to make me. Like,
Yeah.
I will not be serving anyone well at that point if I am trying to help them, because I'll be a disaster. So
Smart. That's just
being upfront with that. But yes, I will be starting to take clients again in November, and plan in January to do a very similar version of my one-on-one program as a group. I've done that a couple times in the last year and really enjoyed the community between the women, along with what they're learning and, the things that we've already talked about. So I do have both of those options coming up really pretty soon, honestly, by the time we get there. But what I do have available right now, so on my website, if you, I think I can just give you the links, or I can put them in the Facebook group, but on my website, I do have a link that you can put in an application for my wait list, so that when I come back, like early to mid-November and start to basically like have calls, that you would be on the list and able to be eligible for that. Because I think that the first couple months will fill up pretty fast, since I normally fill up monthly anyway. So there's an application for that. Also on my website, if you go on, there's like a little pop-up for a guide, and that's my Empowered Fertility Guide. What that looks at for you is it really kind of goes through some like misconceptions about hormones, give you some information about where you might be in your cycle, or like the different phases of your cycle. And then I have a really nice little list of foods that you can eat in the first half of your cycle and the second half. So we haven't talked much about cycle syncing today. That's kind of more like on the side of cycle syncing. But then on my Instagram, which I'll link to, like Casey said, I really try to have a lot of education on there, because I'm just passionate about women like starting to have those mental triggers of like, oh, maybe what I've always been doing isn't working for me, and like maybe this is where I can go. So I have a lot of different posts with information there. But in my profile link there, I have a guide for better energy and better periods. And what that really goes back to is like all the things I start with my clients on supporting your liver. And it's mostly food. I have a few supplements recommended on there too. And it really kind of talks about that connection between the liver and the gut and hormones. So a lot of the things I've touched on today, both of those are totally free. You can get those resources and just download them. And then I also do have a like kind of DIY course. I don't know that I have a link anywhere right now. So if you get on my Instagram and you're like, where's the course? So just send me a message. But it's kind of just like a mini course. I made it for busy mamas, but it goes through all the things cycle syncing. And I have some really nice little PDFs on there. So you can kind of like have your cheat sheets. And each week of your cycle is broken down into like an 8 or 10 minute lesson. So you can just like listen for a little bit and be like, okay, I know where I am and I know what to do this week, without having to like dive in for hours and figure it out. And also, if you are looking to get off of birth control, or wondering about natural fertility planning, or really kind of, I'm not a certified fertility awareness method coach, but I have done a lot of research on that. And so kind of the method that I teach is really around fertility awareness. So that's all in that course as well. So that's kind of like my DIY course that I have available if you're just kind of specifically looking at like, I just want to understand my cycle. That's what that course is for. And that's called Decode Your Cycle. I think that was all the questions.
Good. And so your Instagram handle is Abundant Life Wellness, right?
Yes.
Okay. So y'all be sure and go follow her. I will put in the comments her website so that you guys will have that. And then
I'll be happy to give you the links for those guides too.
Perfect.
I'll drop those in the chat for you so you have them.
Awesome.
But yes, I love to have some good things to start with, and then you can always feel free to reach out to me. While I am off, there will be either I'll be available a little bit later down the road, or I also have another coach that works with me now. And so she's going to be doing a lot of just kind of like communicating and support while I'm off. So I'm really excited to, when I come back, have her like fully integrated, and she's going to be able to do a lot of awesome things too. She has a lot of the same background as me as a nurse, but she also has a ton of experience with pregnancy and postpartum, because she's actually worked in a birth center for years and years now. And so I feel like that will like really round out the whole like women's health spectrum that we're working in right now. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm excited for you. And congratulations early.
Thank you.
For your baby, and enjoy that time. Soak it in, after however many kids, that it goes by so fast.
I already know.
Yeah. But you guys, if you enjoy content like this, be sure and go over and like my group, Wholesome Made Simple. And Leisha, thank you so much for your time and for coming on here and all the amazing information you gave us today.
Thank you. It's been so fun. Obviously, I could talk about this a lot because I just like talked a ton, but I'm so glad we were able to do
Well,
this.
I would love to circle back later and pick your brain about a few more things too. So
yeah, I'll be back.
Definitely. Okay. Well, enjoy your time. Guys, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.